Hello there, it's me, Bill Patton, with Visual Training for Tennis, and I'm with the boy wonder, Ryan Hanrahan. He's he's older than he looks, and he's in Sydney, Australia. So we're having this amazing talking from completely different parts of the world, 19 hours away. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Bill. Hope I
Excellent.
can live even a quarter up to my name, Boy Wonder. But I just do
Yeah.
my best
Well,
best to
your
make tennis
voice
great
your
again.
your voice just cracked when you said it, so that's good. So anyway, it's good to be able to have the upper hand on an Aussie who, because if you've ever been around Aussies, you know that they have a way of picking on you. So I like to go on offense first, and then that's good. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a good-natured talk about visual training for tennis, and we're going to dial in on mostly tracking skills, but not necessarily in a medical definition of tracking, but more of a sports performance definition. And if somebody can find a better word for me to use than tracking, then I will use that word. But until then, I'm going to use what I use. So we have some bullet points that we're going to go over. Do you want to kick it off, Ryan?
Would
And
you like to tell us more about tracking and your definition of tracking and what it involves in the game of tennis?
Yeah, I mean, well, first let's start with the medical definition. The medical definition has, a doctor with his pen or whatever, or a light going like this, and having you, move your eyes with the object.
Yeah.
And so that's true medical tracking. And what that leads to, though, are these saccadic motions of the eye. So your doctor is looking for most likely some kind of neurological problem where your eyes aren't in conjunction with each other, or they're not jumping regularly, or what have you. But in terms of tracking a moving object, I think of it more like tracking a wild animal. And so if you were out in the bush, oh, that's a word I don't use very much. Uh, I'll try not to use too many, euphemistic Australian words if I can avoid it. But if you were tracking an animal and you're moving and the animal is also moving, then there's this sort of visual skill that you use that allows you to keep track of where it is without necessarily looking directly at it the whole time, because that would be fraught with danger. Um, so so now the brain has an amazing ability to reconcile the blurred object. So and this is something that I think in conventional wisdom of coaching sports that not enough credence is given to. So tracking, in my definition, simply put, is your brain's ability to reconcile the blurred motion of the ball, and for you to learn to move appropriately with that.
And so tracking involves when it just comes towards you or the whole structure of the point.
Well, I mean, it could be going towards you or away from you. So you can track, and you ought to be tracking the ball as it leaves you at some point. And that's probably an issue that would create some controversy. So I think, to be on the safe side of that argument, I think it's wise to be tracking your ball sometime after it has crossed the net, because you do want to complete your shot before you start to engage with getting ready for the next shot. One thing that I've often said to my players is, if you finish your shot completely and the quality of your shot is better, it might not come back. So then there's no reason for you to get ready for the next one. But if you compromise your shot by preparing for the next one while you're still finishing the other one, then you're actually not helping yourself by preparing early for the next one.
And you should be knowing where your balls are going anyway. So you should be able to anticipate the next shot, the 1-2 strike. So reference to Dan and Sterling Struther.
Okay, well, so that's good. Let's dig into that a little bit. So where do contingencies come into play on that? Yes, to some degree you can have different high probability outcomes that can happen after you've hit your shot, but you can't really predict. There's no predicting the outcome of your opponent's shot. I mean, there are very few times that you would say, okay, I'm going to get a high ball back. I mean, if you hit a ball into the very corner of the forehand corner, then 99% of the ball, 99% of the time, you know you will be getting a high ball back.
Yeah.
But people can successfully hit some crazy angles from there. They can drive the ball down the line on that winner or error. They're just going to hit a winner down the line and blast the ball as hard as they can. It does happen. So having contingencies, I think, is an important thing, because then you have, if you hit that deep ball, a pretty high percentage of time you're going to get the high ball back. So you're ready to pounce on that, and that's your first thing. But then you're also able to visually recognize when something else is happening and have a well-trained contingency plan for when Roger Federer hits that squash shot forehand while he's moving diagonally backwards.
Yeah.
So, because that also happens, and there are quite a few people who can hit that shot quite well as a very defensive forehand shot. And so, if someone owns that shot, then now you have to prepare for that too.
So I guess, tracking on a tennis court, it is like tracking in the bush. So having prior knowledge to your prey helps.
Oh yes, oh absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I mean I hadn't thought about it completely in that terms, but yes, knowing if you know the behavior of a certain type of animal that you're going after, and what scares it, what's normal to that beast, what's their normal pattern that they follow, and that can be applied to tennis players as well, because to some extent your tracking is going to be tailored to the idiosyncrasies of your opponent.
Yeah, that's right. So tracking taps into the unthinking brain. Could you explain a bit more of that?
If we take a close look at this, can I make it bigger? Oh, I think I can. How's that? Is it full screen now? Is it looking good?
It looks a little bit big on my end, but I don't have full screen.
Okay,
That's
good.
okay.
Yes. All right, now let's look at the brain for a second. And so if you look at number 1, it says sensory data fed to the thalamus. So basically through your eyes, the first place the data goes is in the thalamic region of your brain. So, and then from there, information is sent to the amygdala, and between the two of them, they detect threats. Threat detection is the number one thing that happens through your eyes. And so from there, what happens is not only is the data sent to the amygdala, which is the place where the response comes from, and my amygdala fired without much control, and that's why I turned off the screen share, because the data also went to my cortex, but my cortex did not know what to do with it. So I had no ability to regulate that behavior. So that was a really good example of what happens. So whenever you're dealing with like a new situation, newness is generally threatening. And it also, and then your brain doesn't have the ability to shut off the kind of the flight or fight syndrome, the fight or flight ability of your body to get you out of there quickly. Now, when your cortex is fully developed, then you also have the ability to kind of regulate your response. You're able to see that something that maybe something that scared you before doesn't scare you the same way now. Imagine the first time that you saw a 70-mile-an-hour forehand coming your way. And that's not a frightfully fast ball, but to a beginner, it's absolute terror. And to a player who hasn't been hitting those or hasn't had them hit to them before, it's a significant challenge. And it takes a while to be able to develop the ability to not only track that ball coming at a faster speed, but then also have the well-educated, well-trained cerebral cortex that is helping you modulate your response so that you can actually be effective. And then a funny thing happens once that happens, once you get to the point where you no longer sense a threat and have to think really hard about it, then what happens is your brain does a quick threat assessment, number 4, and then the amygdala blocks slow thinking because the default position is slow thinking. So when things are new, you have to think hard about them.
Yeah.
And then something that overrides that is when the danger level is so high that then you respond to danger without thinking. So the example I always use is if there was a tiger running towards you, you would instantly run and you wouldn't think about it for a moment. So that unthinking response can actually be trained for performance rather than a response to fear.
Yeah.
And then that's where you have, one of my favorite moments of Roger Federer, who may never play on the tour again. It's looking. When he was telling Andy Roddick that Andy could serve as hard as he wants, and that Roger he was going to return it. So,
Yeah, I remember them.
So that's pretty amazing that someone can promise that they're going to return 135 to 145 mile an hour serves. That's a pretty high level of training in that regard. Did I answer your question or did I go on a really nice tangent?
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's just about 208 to 224 kilometers an hour for the Australians.
Those what?
You're talking in miles. We talk in kilometers, so that was about 208 kilometers to 25 kilometers.
Okay, good. So thanks for translating. That's good. Yeah. Jimmy Carter tried to get us on the metric system, but it didn't work. We're too tied to the empirical system. Imperial. I'm sorry, imperial. I misspoke. So anyway,
yeah, that answers the question. Yeah, that's good.
All right. So yeah, it's an important thing to realize that we want to get people out of their brain and into their senses. Come out of your mind and come to your senses, because your senses can help direct your behavior more quickly and easily. Because otherwise, I see a lot of paralysis by analysis. All right, so I stopped the share screen there.
Yeah, so that was kind of half the question, really.
Okay.
So the other half would be, so how does the tracking
child care issues?
Yeah, how does the tracking?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one boy's sick from school. He's got the cough, so he's not allowed to go to school because of the coronavirus threat. So
oh, right.
Even though there's no cases in the state.
Moving on, we're going to have to push past that topic, but thanks for sharing.
Anyway, so
well fast.
Just a second, I have to get him out of the room. He's coughing too much.
Second half of the question was? And so this is when it's good to do some live stuff because it gets fun like this. But then at the same time, it's all right to have video editing equipment and before putting it on YouTube.
Yeah, you can download this, can't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, it's so much better than Zoom. It's amazing because
Yeah,
I
so
can
we
not
get,
only go live on my profile like this or any other page or group that I'm a member of, but it automatically records and it's the processing is so much faster. But anyway, second half of the question was,
so how does the tracking tap into the thinking, and how can we use that? So you explained how the threat works, but how does tracking correlate to that?
yeah. Well, a lot of it has to do with your mental state because if you're calm and you're fully present and all that, and you're not, if the speed of shot does not create a crazy amount of anxiety for you, then the clarity of your mind is there, and you can take this time. I'm going to turn it off. You can take that blurred line, that blurred arc of that ball, and you can allow your brain to sort of unconsciously process that while you're moving, and if you allow that to happen. So essentially, if you just simply shut off the overthinking part of your brain,
Yeah,
then it just happens automatically. Of course, there's a lot of training and fine tuning of positioning, but like for instance, my players who I have many players who are just about to play their first competitive matches of their lives coming up in 2021. Many players.
that's good
So
to hear.
right now, what our main thrust is, okay, we've worked on your strokes, we've worked on some rudimentary positioning things. Now, in the real world of on court, how well do you manage the spacing between yourself and the ball? And so frequently we'll rally or we'll play points out, and the player will make an error, and we'll stop after that. We'll say, okay, what was the issue there? And the
Yep.
bulk of the issues are related to vision and spacing.
Yep.
Um, they were either too close or too far away from the ball. And now, what I do with my players, instead of instructing them all the time, I ask them, what was the problem there? And then they stop and they go, oh, I was too close to the ball. I'm like, okay, very good. All right, so let's do this. Let's just focus on that shot for a moment, and then you hit. Let's see if you can get you to hit, 4 or 5 or 10 shots in a row where you have enough space, and or maybe you're okay with being a little bit further away from the ball. And so we make that a point of emphasis, and then they go on. Then we go on and wait for the next occurrence. And then as that goes on, then they sort of self-manage their own movement by tracking the ball, and we take it from there. Now, one thing that we're not talking about that actually occurs prior, but we've talked about this in other discussions, is the first reaction to the ball coming out of the racket. That's a really important thing because your brain, by the time the ball's out by that much, with 95% accuracy, knows the general area you're going to.
Yeah.
But this discussion's a little bit more specific about um, tracking the ball so that by the time it has bounced, you more often than not are in nearly perfect position. And this is something that you'll find with the very best players in the world, is that the player that is more often in an ideal position to hit the ball right around the time it bounces is going to hit much more successfully than the ones who do that less often. So to me, that's a dividing line between good and great players and elite players, is how well do they get positioned, and are they, I mean, I think many times you'll see the ball's bounced and the player has the racket prepared for the forward swing.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Even teaching the beginners how to start practicing that goes a long way in how far they'll or how long they'll play tennis for. Really, I try to teach the beginner how to kind of track the ball early, so as early as they can, even before it goes over the net. You can comment after, but I find it helps in how long they stay in the game, so they can pick up tracking the ball, they can pick up playing the game faster and hence enjoy it more and want to keep going.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely it for sure. I mean that is what has driven this whole exploration in visual skills because there are two places where people break down, and it's from beginner to the time that they can play a match, and then later it's this sort of this asteroid field between 4.0 level and 4.5 because people learned sufficient visual skills in order to be able to play the game up to a certain level. But then when the ball speeds and spins became so great that their eyes now could no longer keep up, then there's a limit placed on how good they can get in their game. And then people learn it accidentally, or if they have the luxury of training with people who really teach this stuff, then many more of them can go on to higher levels. Now, answer what your comment a little bit more. There's a transition that's sort of mysterious between these things, and I certainly can't explain it. And but but the transition is that you have the initial phase of where people are scanning to the other side. So you may have tracked your ball in the last phase to your opponent, but then you use scanning to see the ball come out of the strings. Then there's this shift that happens at some point. I can't explain exactly when it is, and it's probably different for everyone. But at
Yeah,
some point, then you get tracking that occurs, and then tracking may end at the bounce of the ball on your side, or it may continue for a little bit, and then but then there's more of a focus that is most effective at the last segment from the bounce into the racket. But I do believe that there aren't that it's the minority of coaches who are teaching players to track the ball early, like yourself.
minority.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, I don't think it's the majority of tennis professionals that are teaching that. I think that what the most common thing you hear is watch the ball and keep your eye on the ball, but
Yeah,
they're not discussing tracking. So keep your eye on the ball and watch the ball are global all the time things.
yeah. Well, I
But
like those
yeah,
questions. So even other parts of the game, get more top spin. Okay, well, how? Track the ball. Okay, but when? So you got to really work out and train the player when and how and why to do something, kind of thing.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're just giving them general tips that they got to try to solve the rest of the puzzle.
exactly. No, that's very well said. Yeah, I can't. I have nothing to add to that. That's it's really no. It's really important point you
Yeah.
make because people aren't specific enough about what they're teaching and why they're teaching it and when do you do it. I'll give you an example. This will probably get me in trouble because people will probably recognize where this came from, or they'll go searching. So um, I saw a video and it said the ultimate power forehand, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's great. So you can hit the ball 10 or 15 feet out along the baseline because you hit it at the wrong time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when do you want an ultimate power forehand? Like almost never. I want an ultimate controlled aggression, intelligently tactically placed in the court that creates, a predictable outcome from the next shot. But then that's not a very snappy YouTube video title.
No. No, I would agree because I think the top three guys at the moment are they're partly so good because of themselves, being more tactical and always come out. They each time they play each other, they kind of come up with a new game plan every time, and then they adapt the next time. But I do feel like I haven't looked in it too hard, but when I watch the matches live, I feel like the players below, you kind of got the Birdish and things like that. They're just gone out for the same game plan each time, and that's referring back to the ultimate power forehand or backhand.
Well, yeah, I mean, people aren't. I think people have the intelligence to play intelligently. There just aren't enough messages out there about how playing intelligently is going to help them to win more. So this is why visual skills are also important, because it's a missing piece of being able to understand tactics better, because when you're more um, visually attuned to observing what's happening in the match, then you're also more likely to be able to make tactical adjustments in the match. But if you're just barely trying to get the ball over because you're in a constant state of anxiety, then there's not a lot to manage. It's just you're just out there running around with it like a chicken with your head cut off. And yes, there are a lot of really talented ball strikers who hit the ball so incredibly well, and they play a brain dead game. They're being beaten by chess masters because their game is based largely on brute force, or maybe better athleticism, or slightly better technique. But they'll lose to a player who's actually playing smarter tennis, attacking their weaknesses with relative strengths, and taking advantage of the tactical game.
Yeah, it's a bit of instinctive play rather than planned. What am I going to do next? Trying to solve a problem, or it's just okay. I'm just gonna kind of react to whatever happens out there. I think that's why people start getting frustrated too. They kind of don't know what they're doing, and it's just not working. The results aren't coming, and they don't know how to fix it because they're just used to being instinctive. I think.
That's an interesting word, because I think instincts can be trained. You can train your instincts, but if you're
Okay, at
only
at
but
the
okay,
base level.
no, I want to yeah, let's cut that up a little bit. I know I like that
Yeah.
you use the word, but I think if people are solely playing instinctively without well trained thinking behind it, then they're missing out. And so
Yeah.
having a well trained instincts to make instant decisions based on the contingencies that come up. When they do this, I do that. When they do this, I do this. And so having your next move planned out. I mean, for me, I struggled with taking advantage of short balls. Um, and I had a coach that was very frustrated with me, but he was um, he was really good at, and very patient, even though he was frustrated with me, letting so many short balls go by without coming to the net, or trying to crack the point open. But that's a trained skill. That's a trained
Yeah.
instinct, because you have to recognize that the short ball is coming before it lands. You have to know that that ball's coming short, because then your response is you're going to have to move forward before it lands, not after. So I will wait for and this is something that I've done with a lot of high school kids, is teaching them how to recognize different shots, and tracking does that. I mean, so the two things work in conjunction with each other. I mean, first you get the initial um, ball out of the racket, and your brain does 95% of the work. But then there's that other 5% of, you know, collecting more data on that ball coming in. But you have to be able to respond with within the first 2 to 5 feet of the ball's flight if you're going to make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point with the coming forward, because I think a lot of players actually do that very, very well. Most players, I think the next shot is what they don't do well. They often can retreat, or they're trying to hit that shot just an outright winner, but they don't really follow it up that well unless it's positioned in the same spot, same depth of the court.
Interesting.
Right to the top level, I reckon.
If you know anything about Indian Wells, the desert air makes the ball fly somewhat unpredictably, because it knuckles. The spin doesn't have as much to have friction on because the air is so dry. So the ball flights can be very unpredictable. So I have this amazing video of Federer hitting his serve, getting a short ball, hitting the forehand, coming in instantly to take a ball early, coming to the net. The opponent lobs over his backhand shoulder. He quickly turns and hits a perfect, backhand overhead winner, right? It's in super slow motion. Hey folks, this will be a good time for the YouTube plug. If you haven't been on my YouTube, it's Bill Patton, Infinite Vision Coach. And I turned it into a quiz. What can you learn from Roger visually? Toss, and his eyes are directed up at his contact point while he's going through a lot of his serve mechanics. Eyes are already there, right? So number one there, right? And then after he serves, then his eyes go to his opponent, and then his eyes come to his contact point, and all of these different things. And you can see him turning his dominant eye towards the incoming ball on the backhand overhead. So there's this constant shifting of vision in order to perform, these difficult tasks, with the backhand overhead being one of the most difficult shots in tennis. What were you talking about?
Well, yeah, what was I saying? I think we jumped topics a little bit. I was talking more about the instinctive approach shots.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
but
that's a
back to
follow-on.
instinctiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, and who's the ultimate instinctive player? And that's part of what makes the Roger Federer versus Nadal rivalry so good, is that Nadal is maybe one of the most disruptive players, if not the most disruptive player of all time. Because one thing I don't think people appreciate enough about is how much he changes his spins intentionally to create a very difficult visual experience for all of his opponents. Watch him hit 10 forehands, and I bet you that 7 or 8 of them are very significantly different than the other 2 or 3. And that is intentional, because yes, he's going to hit a lot of heavy topspin to the backhand, but some of it's like this, some of it's like that, some of it's like that, some of it's like this. So he's doing many different things with his top spins so as to create wildly different contact point scenarios for his opponents. And, Federer being one of the players who's maybe the greatest of all time also at arriving at the ball on balance for an efficient shot. I mean, it's a scintillating matchup there, all brought to you by incredible tracking of the ball. Yeah, Nadal probably creates the greatest tracking challenge of any player ever.
Cleaner balance ball striking.
Yes.
Cleaner more on balance.
Yeah. And that's such a huge key to victory, because I mean, when you can hit the ball a little bit cleaner and get 5% more energy out of that ball with less energy consumed, and do that over 5 hours, I mean, you're going to have an edge. There's no doubt about that. So I mean, this is something that sets those top 3 apart also, is how well they get in position, and very few times are they giving up any kind of advantage by not hitting the ball well. I had an interesting, I forget who this was, but somebody had a junior at Wimbledon. They had the practice court next to Nadal at Wimbledon. And I forget who this is. I would love to credit them, but I just can't remember. But obviously it must be a great coach if they've got a junior at Wimbledon. But Nadal comes out, and they've already been on the court for a little bit, the junior and his coach, her coach, and Nadal comes out, and from the very first shot, it was just perfect. Rafa leads off practice with a perfectly struck shot. And I think that also
Yeah.
speaks to a mentality. Players at the very top, the greatest of all time, they've put the warm up in ahead of time. They've done their visualization. They've thought about it. They're That first ball, they want to set the tone for the rest of their practice time by striking it perfectly. Why not? I mean, if you have the wherewithal to do that, then you should, and try to maintain a really high level of excellence. And I would say the uncharted territory for a lot of players is to track that ball really well and really fine tune your footwork so that you can have the ultimate best possible positioning for every shot that you get. And you can't help but perform your best if you do that.
Well, that's great. So we covered the three main basic skills that I focus on for all levels, and that's balance, timing, and control.
Excellent. So, hey,
So,
everybody, if you could go, this is going to be edited for all, because we're going to take all the fun stuff out. And it'll be on my YouTube in a little bit. And
you should edit only the fun stuff in for another video, the blooper
yeah,
section.
we should have best of bloopers, Bill and Ryan, for sure. But it's Bill Patton, Infinite Vision Coach. If you need to search it on by my email, it's schooloftennis@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this and you want to make a comment, please make a comment. Otherwise, we probably will try to go live on a different platform. It could be Twitter, it could be a group on Facebook. Let's see what happens. I don't know that we're going to come back to my profile again for a while. So, if you go to my YouTube, you'll catch everything that we produce. And thanks for your time, Ryan.
Thanks, Bill.